The Vorthak delegation had been in the palace for exactly 14 minutes when Princess Maya's orange tabby Whiskers wandered into the throne room and froze every instructor in the Galactic Academy. Queen Elena watched from her throne as her 8-year-old daughter sat cross-legged on the marble floor, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just created the most dangerous diplomatic incident in human history. The cat, purring softly, had positioned itself directly between the human royal family and the towering crystalline beings who controlled the fate of entire star systems. The Vorthak ambassador's form shimmered with what Elena recognized as barely contained fury. Its faceted surface caught the light from the chamber's windows, casting rainbow fragments across the walls like broken promises. Behind it, 3 other Vorthak delegates stood motionless, the crystalline bodies humming with a frequency that made the air itself vibrate. "Your Majesty," the ambassador's voice resonated through translation matrices embedded in the walls, each word precise and cold. "This creature has committed an act of supreme disrespect to the Vorthak hegemony." Elena's smile never wavered, though every muscle in her body tensed. She had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. Humanity's formal application to join the Galactic Council required unanimous approval from all existing members, and the Vorthak held veto power over every decision. One wrong move could condemn her species to eternal isolation among the stars. The royal guards, trained since childhood to read her expressions, remained perfectly still. Captain Morrison's hand didn't move toward his weapon, but Elena caught the almost imperceptible shift in his stance. He had seen what she had seen. The way the Vorthak delegates' harmonics had changed the moment Whiskers entered the room. Maya giggled, reaching out to pet the cat. "Whiskers likes the pretty rock people, Mama. Look how his fur is all sparkly near them." The ambassador's form pulsed brighter. "The feline displays no fear. This is unprecedented." Elena's diplomatic training kicked in, but every instinct screamed danger. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy for their ability to project psychic intimidation, so powerful that most species couldn't remain conscious in their presence without extensive conditioning. The fact that Maya and her pet showed no signs of distress wasn't just unusual, it was impossible. "Perhaps," Elena said carefully, her voice carrying the measured tone of centuries of royal protocol, "we might discuss the significance of this observation." The delegation's harmonics shifted again, and Elena realized with growing horror that they weren't just surprised, they were afraid. She had studied every available record about the Vorthak, spent hours with xenopsychologists and military advisors, but nowhere in their files had she found any reference to what might happen when a species showed complete immunity to their most fundamental ability. Princess Maya stood up, still holding Whiskers, and took a step toward the ambassador. The cat's purring grew louder. Every instructor in the Galactic Academy's observation deck had gone completely silent. Elena could see them through the chamber's upper windows, dozens of beings from across the galaxy who had come to witness humanity's formal evaluation. Not one of them was moving. "Stay exactly where you are, sweetheart," Elena said softly, never taking her eyes off the Vorthak delegation. But Maya had already taken another step forward, and Whiskers had begun to glow with the same ethereal light that surrounded the crystalline beings. The ambassador's form suddenly expanded, rising 3 feet higher than before. "Impossible. The creature is resonating with our quantum frequency. Only the Primarchs can achieve such harmony." Elena's blood went cold. The Primarchs were legendary beings, mentioned only in the most ancient galactic texts, supposedly extinct for millions of years. If the Vorthak believed that a simple house cat was somehow connected to them, "Maya," she said, her royal composure finally cracking, "come back to Mama right now." But her daughter was already reaching out to touch the ambassador's crystalline surface, and Whiskers was no longer glowing. He was blazing with pure white light that hurt to look at directly. The chamber's silence shattered as the ambassador let out a sound that bypassed every translation matrix in the room, resonating directly through bone and crystal and metal. It was a sound of recognition, of terror, and of something else that Elena couldn't identify but knew in her heart meant that nothing would ever be the same. The other Vorthak delegates began backing away from Maya and her cat, their harmonics creating a discordant symphony that made the very air tremble. Outside, Elena could hear alarms beginning to sound throughout the palace complex. Maya looked back at her mother with innocent eyes that suddenly seemed far older than 8 years. Mama, Whiskers says the pretty people have been waiting for us for a very long time. The royal guards moved in perfect synchronization, forming a protective circle around Elena while maintaining their distance from Maya and the cat. Captain Morrison's voice was steady despite the chaos erupting around them, speaking into his communicator with the kind of calm that only came from extensive combat experience. Code 7. Repeat, Code 7. All units maintain position. Do not approach the princess. Elena felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders like armor made of lead. Whatever was happening in this room would determine not just humanity's place in the galaxy, but possibly the fate of every living being in it. The ambassador's form began to shift and change, its crystalline structure rearranging itself into patterns that hurt to perceive directly. When it spoke again, its voice carried harmonics that Elena felt in her bones. Your Majesty, we must convene the Emergency Council immediately. The Primarch bloodline has awakened, and the galaxy must prepare for what comes next. Maya giggled again, and scratched Whiskers behind his ears. The cat purred louder, and the light around him pulsed in rhythm, with heartbeats that belonged to no species Elena had ever encountered. She realized with crystalline clarity that her daughter's innocent question about joining the Galactic Council had just become the most important conversation in the history of interstellar civilization. The Emergency Council convened in the palace's war room within an hour, transforming the space into a nexus of galactic power that humanity had never been intended to witness. Representatives from 18 different species materialized through quantum transmitters, their forms filling the room with a symphony of alien languages and conflicting energy signatures. Elena sat at the head of the massive crystalline table, her position as host the only thing preventing complete chaos. Maya remained in the throne room under heavy guard, still playing with Whiskers, still completely unaware that her pet had just rewritten the fundamental laws of galactic politics. The Vorthak ambassador had undergone a complete transformation. Where once stood a being of supreme confidence and barely contained condescension, now pulsed a creature consumed by something that looked remarkably like reverence, mixed with primal terror. Council members, the ambassador began, its harmonics creating visual patterns in the air above the table. We stand at the threshold of an event that was prophesied in the earliest chronicles of galactic civilization. Elena watched as representatives from species she had only read about in classified reports shifted uncomfortably. The Zephyrians, beings of pure energy, flickered with agitation. The Kromnak delegates, massive insectoid creatures, whose exoskeletons were harder than battle armor, actually took a step backward. The Primarchs, continued the ambassador, were the first consciousness to achieve dimensional transcendence. They seeded life throughout the galaxy before ascending to planes of existence beyond our comprehension. The last verified Primarch contact occurred 4.7 million years ago, when they warned of a coming convergence that would require their return. A Zephyrian representative pulsed with urgent yellow light. Are you suggesting that this human child and her companion are connected to the Primarchs? I am suggesting nothing, the ambassador replied, its form brightening with each word. I am stating an observable fact. The feline demonstrates quantum resonance capabilities that match precisely the harmonic signatures recorded in our most sacred archives. The probability of coincidence is mathematically zero. Elena's diplomatic training had never prepared her for this moment. What exactly are you asking of humanity? The room fell silent, except for the subtle harmonics of beings breathing, thinking, existing in forms that defied human understanding. She could feel the weight of their collective attention, the pressure of decisions that would echo through centuries. The Kromnak delegate stepped forward, its voice a grinding mechanical symphony that the translation matrices struggled to interpret. Your Majesty, if your offspring carries Primarch heritage, then humanity possesses something that every civilization in the galaxy has sought for millions of years: direct communication with beings who existed before the formation of the Council itself. You want to study my daughter. We want to prepare for what her awakening might herald, the Vorthak ambassador corrected. The prophecies speak of a convergence, a time when the galaxy faces a threat that requires Primarch intervention. If that time has arrived, The lights in the war room suddenly dimmed, and every representative turned toward the chamber's entrance. Maya stood in the doorway, still holding Whiskers, flanked by Captain Morrison and 2 other guards whose expressions revealed their complete inability to understand what they were protecting. "Mama, Whiskers wants to talk to the council," Maya announced, with the casual confidence that only 8-year-olds could possess. The cat in her arms had begun to glow again, but this time the light was different, deeper, more complex, carrying patterns that seemed to bypass optical perception entirely and speak directly to consciousness itself. Elena started to rise, but the Vorthak ambassador's harmonic suddenly changed to something that felt like a reverent hymn. Around the table, representatives from across the galaxy began responding in kind, each species adding their own harmonic signature to a growing symphony that filled the room with living sound. "The Primarch speaks," the ambassador whispered, its crystalline form now blazing so brightly that Elena had to shield her eyes. Maya walked into the center of the room as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Whiskers leapt from her arms and landed on the table, his small form somehow commanding the attention of beings who controlled fleets of starships and the fates of billions. The cat opened his mouth and spoke with a voice that carried the weight of geological ages. "The Devourers have returned to this galaxy. The convergence begins in 7 cycles. Prepare your people." Every representative in the room reacted simultaneously. The Zephyrians flared into blinding brightness. The Cromnock delegates' exoskeletons began resonating like struck bells, and species Elena didn't recognize started making sounds that her translation matrix couldn't even attempt to interpret. The Vorthak ambassador's form was pulsing so rapidly it looked like a strobe light. "How long do we have?" Whiskers turned his glowing eyes toward Elena, and for one impossible moment she saw eternity reflected in their depths. Civilizations rising and falling, stars being born and dying, the endless dance of creation and destruction that had shaped the galaxy since its birth. "Ask the Queen," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made reality itself tremble. "She will know what must be done." Elena stared at her daughter's pet, understanding with perfect clarity that her universe had just become infinitely larger and infinitely more dangerous. The being wearing the form of an orange tabby cat was waiting for her response, and the fate of every living thing in the galaxy depended on what she said next. Maya looked up at her with trust so complete that Elena felt her heart break and reassemble itself in the same moment. "What do you need me to do?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the cosmic implications of the question. The assembled representatives turned toward her with expressions that ranged from desperate hope to carefully concealed terror. She realized that in the span of 2 hours, she had gone from being a planetary ruler seeking membership in an interstellar organization to being the focal point of a crisis that threatened existence itself. Whiskers began to purr, and the sound resonated through dimensions Elena couldn't name. Elena rose from her chair with the fluid grace that 20 years of royal training had instilled in her bones, but movement felt different now, as if the very concept of motion had acquired new meaning. The assembled representatives waited in silence that carried the weight of falling stars. "Captain Morrison," she said, never taking her eyes off the cat that had revealed itself to be something unimaginably ancient. "Seal the palace. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." Morrison's acknowledgement came through comms channels that suddenly seemed to carry harmonics they had never possessed before. Elena realized that Whiskers' presence was changing more than diplomatic protocol. Reality itself was shifting to accommodate whatever was awakening. The Vorthak ambassador pulsed with urgent light patterns. "Your Majesty, the Devourers consume entire star systems. If they have indeed returned, we have precious little time to organize defenses." "How long?" Elena asked the question directly to Whiskers, understanding somehow that political chains of command no longer applied to this situation. The cat stretched with feline casualness that seemed absurd given the circumstances, then fixed her with eyes that held depths she couldn't fathom. "In your measurements, approximately 2 years until they reach the Outer Rim territories. 5 years until they threaten the core worlds." Maya had wandered to the massive viewing screen that dominated one wall of the war room, seemingly fascinated by the patterns of deep space it displayed. Elena watched her daughter trace constellations with tiny fingers and wondered what else was about to change in their lives. "The Primarchs left contingency protocols," Whiskers continued. his voice carrying harmonics that translated directly into understanding rather than words. Your species was chosen because you possess something the others lack, the ability to adapt without losing essential identity. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. What exactly are you asking humanity to become? The room's atmosphere shifted as every representative leaned forward, their various forms of attention creating pressure that made breathing difficult. She understood that her next few decisions would determine not just humanity's fate, but the survival prospects of every civilization in the galaxy. Not become, Whiskers corrected, settling into a pose that managed to look both utterly normal and cosmically significant. Become what you already are. The Devourers cannot consume what they cannot understand, and humanity's greatest strength has always been your unpredictability. The Kromnock delegate's exoskeleton began resonating with frequencies that hurt Elena's teeth. Your Majesty, with respect, this is asking your entire species to serve as the galaxy's final line of defense against entities that have destroyed civilizations across multiple galactic arms. Elena looked at Maya, who had begun humming a tune that seemed to make the viewing screen display brighter colors. Her daughter appeared completely untroubled by discussions of cosmic horror and species-level responsibility. What happened to the other species the Primarchs chose? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. The silence that followed was eloquent. Around the table, beings who had lived for centuries developed expressions that spoke of ancient grief and carefully buried trauma. They became exactly what was needed, Whiskers said finally, and in becoming that they transcended physical existence entirely. The galaxy remembers them as myths and legends. Elena felt the weight of species survival settling across her shoulders like mantle made of collapsed stars. Every queen in history had faced moments where individual choice shaped collective destiny, but none had operated at this scale. If we refuse? She asked, though she already knew that wasn't really an option. The Vorthak ambassador's form dimmed to something resembling subdued respect. Then the galaxy dies, and the Devourers continue their expansion into neighboring galactic arms until they have consumed everything that exists. Maya turned from the viewing screen with excitement that belonged purely to childhood wonder. Mama, look! The stars are making patterns like Whiskers does when he's happy. Elena looked at the display and realized with crystalline horror that her daughter was right. The deep space monitoring systems were detecting gravitational anomalies in formations that matched exactly the light patterns Whiskers generated when he purred. They're already here, she breathed, understanding hitting her like ice water in her veins. Not here, Whiskers corrected, his voice carrying new urgency. But they are awakening from dormancy in the void between galaxies. The convergence Maya represents has triggered their movement. Elena stared at her daughter, who was now drawing patterns in the air that seemed to leave traces of light hanging in space. What exactly is Maya? She is what your species has the potential to become, Whiskers replied. The bridge between what you are and what you must be to survive what's coming. The assembled representatives began speaking in urgent overlap in translations, their various forms of panic creating a cacophony that filled the war room with barely controlled chaos. Elena realized that she was witnessing the disintegration of galactic order in real time. Enough, she said, and her voice somehow cut through every competing frequency in the room. The silence that followed was complete. Elena walked to Maya and knelt beside her daughter, taking small hands in hers, and looking into eyes that suddenly seemed to hold depths that matched Whiskers' ancient gaze. Sweetheart, she said softly, do you understand what's happening? Maya nodded with the solemnity that children sometimes displayed when adults finally asked them important questions. The universe is scared, Mama, but Whiskers says you know how to help everyone feel safe again. Elena looked up at the assembled representatives, beings from across the galaxy who had suddenly found themselves depending on decisions made by a species they had barely acknowledged as sentient only hours earlier. Tell me exactly what we need to do, she said to Whiskers, her voice carrying the authority of 20 royal generations and the fierce protectiveness of mothers throughout history. The cat began to purr with frequencies that rewrote the laws of physics. The transformation began at dawn the next day, though Elena suspected that concepts like time had become somewhat flexible since Maya's awakening. She stood on the palace's highest balcony watching as crowds gathered in the capital city's streets. Despite official instructions to remain indoors, word had spread, as word always did when the universe shifted on its axis. Humanity's acceptance into the Galactic Council was now the least significant news story in their species' history. Whiskers sat beside her, no longer bothering to maintain the illusion of ordinary feline behavior. His form pulsed with patterns that Elena was beginning to understand represented different concepts: protection, transformation, necessity, hope. Maya had spent the night in deep conversation with him, though Elena couldn't determine what language they were using. The process will take approximately 6 months. Whiskers had explained during the early morning briefing that had replaced normal royal protocol. Your species possesses unusual neuroplasticity. Combined with specific quantum field adjustments, humans can develop consciousness capabilities that will allow them to perceive and interact with multi-dimensional threats. Captain Morrison had asked the question that everyone was thinking: what percentage of the population will survive the transformation? The silence that followed had lasted long enough for Elena to understand that survival statistics weren't guaranteed. Previous species averaged 47% baseline survival. Whiskers had replied with the clinical detachment that cosmic entities apparently used when discussing extinction events. However, humans demonstrate significantly higher adaptability coefficients. Elena watched her daughter chase butterflies in the palace gardens, completely unaware that she was simultaneously existing in at least 4 different dimensional phases. According to the Vorthak monitoring equipment, Maya was unconsciously generating reality adjustments that allowed her to interact with matter configurations that shouldn't be stable. Your Majesty! The voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Chen, the xenobiologist who had been promoted to Species Transformation Coordinator in the span of 12 hours. We're receiving reports from population centers across the globe. Elena turned from the balcony, noting that Dr. Chen appeared to have aged several years since their last conversation. What kind of reports? Spontaneous consciousness expansion events? People are beginning to perceive dimensional overlays without any preparation or guidance. The transformation is accelerating beyond projected parameters. Elena felt ice forming in her chest. How many people? Approximately 12% of the global population, and the numbers are increasing exponentially every hour. Elena looked at Whiskers, who had begun glowing with what she now recognized as urgent priority harmonics. This wasn't supposed to happen so quickly. The Devourers have moved closer, he replied, his voice carrying frequencies that made her hair stand on end. The defensive transformation is responding to proximity threats. Your species is adapting to survive. From the gardens below, Maya's laughter carried impossible harmonics that seemed to make reality itself more flexible. Elena watched her daughter exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, apparently finding the experience delightful rather than terrifying. What about the ones who aren't adapting? Elena asked, though she dreaded the answer. Doctor Chen consulted readings from equipment that had been impossible to build until yesterday. Neurological strain is significant. We're seeing breakdown patterns in approximately 30% of affected individuals. Elena closed her eyes and felt the weight of species survival pressing against her consciousness, like atmospheric pressure from a dying star. Every decision she made now would echo through generations that might never exist if she chose wrongly. Mama, Maya's voice called from the gardens. Whiskers says it's time for the big conversation. Elena looked down to see her daughter standing in the center of a pattern of light that extended deep into dimensions she couldn't name. Maya was still recognizably herself, but something fundamental had shifted in the way she occupied space. The communication array in Elena's suite activated without anyone touching the controls, filling the room with the harmonics of every major planetary leader on Earth. Presidents, prime ministers, emperors, and tribal chiefs found themselves connected through quantum entanglement networks that hadn't existed an hour earlier. My fellow leaders, Elena said, her voice carrying across continents through technologies that operated on principles beyond human science. Our species is undergoing forced evolution. We have approximately 6 months to adapt to threats that we cannot currently comprehend, or our civilization will cease to exist. The responses came in waves of translated languages and growing panic. Elena listened to the sound of world order collapsing in real time. understanding that traditional government structures were becoming obsolete as quickly as traditional physics. "We cannot stop this process," she continued, cutting through the chaos with authority that somehow resonated across dimensional boundaries. "But we can guide it. Every person on Earth will be offered the choice to undergo assisted transformation or remain in protected zones until the threat passes." "And if the transformation kills them?" The question came from President Martinez, whose voice carried the strain of someone who had been awake for 36 hours. Elena looked at Maya, who was now floating 6 inches above the garden path while feeding butterflies that existed in primary colors she couldn't name. "Then they die as humans," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was saying. "But if they refuse, they die anyway when the devourers arrive." Whiskers leaped onto the balcony rail with grace that defied several laws of physics, his eyes reflecting depths that contained entire star systems. "The choice must be made within 72 hours. After that point, proximity-induced evolution will override individual selection." Elena stared at him, understanding finally that her role as queen had expanded to include responsibilities that no human ruler had ever contemplated. She was now the primary decision-maker for a species transition that would either elevate humanity beyond imagination or eliminate them entirely. The communication array began displaying global population statistics that updated in real time, showing the spreading wave of spontaneous consciousness expansion as it moved across continents. Elena watched the numbers climb and realized that in 3 days she would know whether humanity had evolved or vanished. Maya's voice carried up from the gardens, speaking words in a language that bypassed translation and spoke directly to understanding. "Don't be scared, everyone. Evolution feels weird at first, but then everything gets really, really interesting." Elena smiled for the first time in 24 hours, recognizing in her daughter's voice the same tone of absolute confidence that had shaped 20 generations of royal bloodline. The transformation of humanity had begun, and Elena finally understood why the Primarchs had chosen their species. They weren't the strongest or the wisest or the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. They were the ones who laughed at cosmic horror and called it interesting. The evacuation of Earth's major cities began at midnight, though the concept of time had become increasingly fluid as reality adjusted to accommodate evolving human consciousness. Elena stood in the palace's command center, watching holographic displays that showed population movement patterns across 6 continents, while Maya played with Whiskers in a corner of the room that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the rest of the space. Captain Morrison approached with movement patterns that Elena was beginning to recognize as multidimensional navigation. His consciousness expansion had occurred during the 3rd wave of transformations, and he now existed simultaneously in baseline reality and what the Vorthak called strategic oversight dimension. "Your Majesty, we have confirmation that the protected zones are fully operational," he reported, his voice carrying harmonics that conveyed tactical information directly into Elena's enhanced awareness. "Approximately 60% of the global population has chosen assisted transformation. 23% have entered protected zones. The remainder," Helena nodded, understanding without needing the statistics vocalized. 17% of humanity was attempting to ignore a universe-altering crisis, and their denial was creating spontaneous reality distortions in population centers worldwide. Dr. Chen materialized through quantum displacement, her form flickering between dimensions as she struggled to maintain coherent existence across multiple consciousness levels. "The transformation success rate is exceeding all projections. 87% successful integration, with only 3% experiencing terminal neurological breakdown." Elena felt relief flood through her enhanced nervous system, the emotion-carrying frequencies that made the air around her shimmer with bioluminescent patterns. Humanity was adapting faster and more successfully than any species in galactic records. However, Dr. Chen continued, her expression carrying concerns that operated on multiple conceptual levels. "We're detecting anomalous readings from the transformation centers." Elena's enhanced awareness immediately focused on the problem, her consciousness expanding to interface directly with monitoring systems across the planet. What she perceived made her understand why Dr. Chen appeared worried. The humans undergoing assisted transformation weren't just becoming capable of multidimensional perception and quantum manipulation. They were developing capabilities that the Primarch's protocols hadn't anticipated. Maya looked up from her play with eyes that held galaxies. Mama, the people are becoming more than Whiskers expected. Is that bad? Whiskers' form pulsed with patterns Elena recognized as careful evaluation mixed with something that might have been pride. Not bad. Your species is exceeding evolutionary parameters in ways that suggest... He paused, his ancient consciousness apparently struggling with concepts that challenged even Primarch understanding. Suggest what? Elena prompted. That humanity may become something entirely new, rather than something the Devourers have encountered before. The implications hit Elena like stellar radiation. If humans were evolving beyond Primarch predictions, there was no guarantee that the defensive protocols would function as intended. They might be creating something wonderful or something catastrophic, and they wouldn't know which until the Devourers arrived. The command center's communication arrays activated automatically, connecting Elena to the Galactic Council representatives who had established emergency coordination centers throughout the solar system. Their forms appeared as holographic projections that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Vorthak ambassador's crystalline structure now resonated with frequencies that Elena's enhanced perception recognized as deep concern mixed with fascination. Your Majesty, our monitoring stations are detecting evolutionary patterns that deviate significantly from historical precedent. Elena nodded, her consciousness interfacing directly with galactic sensor networks to perceive what the ambassador was describing. Humanity's transformation was generating quantum signatures that were unlike anything in the Council's extensive databases. Are we still on course to develop effective defenses against the Devourers? She asked, though her enhanced awareness was already processing probability matrices that suggested the answer was more complex than yes or no. The Kromnock delegate's exoskeleton resonated with harmonics that conveyed tactical uncertainty. Unknown. The evolutionary trajectory your species is following has no historical analog. We are in uncharted territory. Maya giggled, the sound carrying frequencies that made space-time bend around her location. Whiskers? Show them the pretty thing that happened yesterday. Elena watched as her daughter projected holographic images that displayed events she hadn't been aware were occurring. Across the globe, transformed humans were beginning to interact with reality in ways that defied every known law of physics. They were generating matter from quantum vacuum, creating stable dimensional portals without technological assistance, and demonstrating consciousness capabilities that operated across galactic distances. Your people are becoming something the universe has never seen, Whiskers observed, his voice carrying awe that seemed inappropriate for a being who had witnessed the birth and death of countless civilizations. The defensive protocols were designed to prepare humanity to survive the Devourers. Instead, you appear to be evolving into something that might be able to eliminate them entirely. Elena felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settle across her consciousness, like armor made of collapsed neutron stars. The transformation that was supposed to ensure humanity's survival might instead be creating something capable of rewriting the fundamental rules of existence. What does that mean for the rest of the galaxy? She asked. The silence that followed carried implications that stretched across light years and centuries. Elena realized that every species in the Council was suddenly faced with the possibility that humanity might emerge from this crisis as something more powerful than the entities that had threatened galactic civilization for millions of years. Maya walked over to Elena and took her hand with the casual affection of children who trust their parents to handle cosmic crises with appropriate competence. "Don't worry, Mama," she said with absolute confidence. "Everything's going to be really, really good." Elena looked at her daughter, understanding finally that Maya's evolution had progressed far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Her 8-year-old daughter was operating with consciousness capabilities that exceeded those of beings who had existed for geological ages. The question was whether humanity's unprecedented transformation would save the galaxy, or fundamentally alter it in ways that no one could predict. Elena smiled at Maya with the expression that had defined royal confidence for 20 generations, and realized that they were about to find out. The Devourers arrived exactly when Whiskers had predicted, though their appearance defied every theoretical model the Galactic Council had developed over millions of years of preparation. Elena stood in the command center that had evolved beyond recognizable architecture, watching displays that showed reality itself bending around entities that existed in too many dimensions for normal perception to process. Maya, now 11 and possessing awareness that spanned multiple galactic arms, sat beside her mother with the calm composure of someone who had grown up watching universe-altering events unfold during breakfast. Her consciousness existed simultaneously in baseline reality and conceptual dimensions that even transformed humans found difficult to navigate. "They're beautiful, Mama," Maya observed, her voice carrying harmonics that made space-time ripple with appreciation. Like geometric poetry that forgot how to follow rules, Elena's enhanced perception allowed her to understand what her daughter meant. The Devourers weren't simply destructive entities. They were manifestations of entropy given consciousness and purpose, elegant in their function of returning complex matter to its most fundamental components. Whiskers had grown beyond his feline form over the past 3 years, though he still maintained enough cat-like characteristics to remain recognizable. His consciousness now existed as patterns of living light that could interface directly with galactic communication networks. "The approach patterns are consistent with historical records," he reported, his voice resonating through dimensions that humans had learned to perceive during the 3rd year of transformation. "However, their behavior upon entering this galactic arm is unprecedented." Elena focused her enhanced awareness on the sensor data streaming from monitoring stations throughout the Outer Rim territories. What she perceived made her understand why Whiskers sounded genuinely confused. The Devourers had stopped moving toward inhabited systems. They hung motionless in the void between stars, their massive forms pulsing with frequencies that suggested something Elena's pre-transformation consciousness wouldn't have been able to recognize as uncertainty. Captain Morrison, whose evolution had progressed to the point where he existed primarily as tactical awareness, with optional physical manifestation, materialized beside Elena's command station. "Your Majesty, long-range sensors are detecting communication attempts from the lead entities." Elena felt surprise ripple through her multidimensional consciousness. The Devourers had never communicated with any species in recorded galactic history. They consumed civilizations completely and moved on without acknowledgement or explanation. "What kind of communication?" Elena asked, though her enhanced perception was already interfacing with the relevant data streams. "Unknown linguistic structure," Morrison replied, his form flickering between dimensions as he processed information that operated on conceptual levels beyond normal language. However, the transformed humans in the outer territories report that they can understand the intent behind the transmissions. Elena expanded her consciousness to interface directly with the communication networks, connecting her awareness to the transformed humans who had volunteered to establish monitoring stations in the void between inhabited systems. What she experienced made her understand that the universe had become far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. The Devourers weren't trying to communicate in any traditional sense. They were projecting conceptual constructs that bypassed language entirely, expressions of curiosity, evaluation, and what Elena's enhanced perception recognized as something remarkably similar to respect. Maya stood up with the fluid grace that characterized humans who had learned to exist in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. "They want to talk to us, Mama. Not to the Council or the other people, just to us." Elena looked at her daughter, understanding that Maya's evolution had progressed to levels that allowed direct interface with entities that existed beyond normal space-time limitations. Over the past 3 years, Elena had watched her child develop capabilities that exceeded even Primarch projections, becoming something beautiful and strange and utterly unprecedented. "What do they want to discuss?" Elena asked. Maya's expression carried depths that belonged to beings who had contemplated existence from perspectives that encompassed entire galactic clusters. "They want to know what we're becoming and why we're not afraid of them." Elena felt understanding cascade through her enhanced consciousness like stellar formation in Fast Forward. The Devourers had spent millions of years consuming civilizations that responded to their approach with terror, desperation, and futile resistance. Humanity had evolved in response to their threat, but instead of becoming better at running or hiding, they had transformed into something that regarded cosmic horror with genuine curiosity. The command center's communication array is activated without input from any human operators, connecting Elena directly to the consciousness networks that now linked all transformed members of her species. She could feel the awareness of billions of humans who had become something magnificent and strange, their combined consciousness creating possibilities that individual minds couldn't contemplate. "Your Majesty," Whiskers said, his form pulsing with patterns that Elena recognized as profound realization, "I believe we are witnessing the emergence of something that has never existed in this universe." Elena nodded, understanding finally what humanity had become during 3 years of forced evolution. They weren't just better at surviving cosmic threats. They had developed into entities capable of transforming cosmic threats into opportunities for unprecedented existence. Maya took her mother's hand with the tender affection that had never changed despite the universe-altering developments in their family dynamic. "Should I talk to them, Mama?" she asked with the same tone she had once used to request permission for staying up past bedtime. Elena smiled with expressions that functioned across multiple dimensions simultaneously, conveying love and pride and absolute trust in ways that transcended traditional human emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. I think it's time to introduce them to what humans become when the universe gives us something interesting to adapt to." Maya's consciousness expanded to encompass communication networks that operated across galactic distances, and Elena watched her daughter begin the first conversation between humanity and entities that had consumed civilization since before Earth's sun began burning. The universe held its breath, waiting to discover what would emerge from dialogue between cosmic devourers and a species that had learned to find beauty in existential terror. Elena realized with perfect clarity that whatever happened next would redefine the meaning of existence for every conscious being in the galaxy, and she couldn't wait to see what Maya would say.